The crowd had gathered long before the show began. The local high school auditorium buzzed with excitement. The annual talent night in the small town of Maplewood was always the most anticipated event of the year. Parents, students, and teachers filled every seat, their laughter echoing through the room, while phones were held up, ready to record moments worth sharing online. On stage behind the red curtain, a boy named Eli Turner stood alone, clutching a cheap microphone with trembling hands. His heart pounded so loud he could barely hear the music echoing in his head. He wasn't supposed to be here, at least, that's what everyone told him. Eli was 16, shy, quiet, and awkward in all the ways high school could punish. He wasn't popular. He wasn't athletic. He wore hand-me-down clothes that never fit right, shoes that squeaked with every step, and glasses that slid down his nose every few seconds. The other kids had nicknames for him: Mumble, Charity Case, Mute Boy. Every day, he sat alone at lunch, sketching or writing lyrics in the corners of his notebook. Music was the only place he felt alive, a private world where he could breathe without being judged. But no one knew that side of him. Until tonight. When the host called his name, "Next up, Eli Turner," laughter rolled through the audience. A few whispered, "Wait, he's performing." Someone else said loudly enough to hear, "He's probably gonna read a poem or something boring." Eli heard it all. His palms were sweating, his throat dry as dust. For a moment, he almost turned back. But then he remembered his father, the man who used to hum old country tunes while fixing cars in their garage. His father had passed away 2 years ago after a long battle with illness, leaving behind an old guitar and the promise that Eli would find his voice one day. Tonight, he wanted to keep that promise. The curtain opened. The stage lights burned his eyes. Laughter still rippled in the crowd as he shuffled to the mic, gripping it tightly. Hi, he stammered, his voice cracking. Someone snickered in the front row. Eli froze. His breath hitched, and for a long, painful moment, the silence was heavier than any insult. Then, just when someone in the back shouted, "Spit it out, Mumble," he closed his eyes, and began to sing. The first note was soft, almost trembling, but pure. It floated through the auditorium like a whisper carried by wind. The laughter died instantly. His voice, fragile but filled with haunting sincerity, drew everyone's attention. As he continued, that fragility turned into strength. The song he sang wasn't famous. It was one he had written himself, about his father, about pain, about being invisible. His voice cracked, but in the most human way possible. Every word was soaked with honesty. "You told me, someday I'd find my sound. Even if no one's left around. Now I'm singing to the sky. Hoping you're listening from on high." A woman in the audience, one of the teachers, covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The students who once mocked him were now silent, frozen by something they couldn't name. The boy they called Mute was suddenly speaking in a language deeper than words, the language of raw emotion. By the time Eli reached the final verse, his voice carried the ache of 1,000 quiet nights spent missing his dad. And when the last note faded into the still air, a silence filled the auditorium, not the awkward kind, but the kind that follows something sacred. Then, slowly, applause began. 1 clap, 2. Then the entire room stood up, cheering, whistling, crying. Eli blinked in disbelief. For the first time in his life, the laughter wasn't mocking. It was celebration. Backstage, as the next act prepared, Eli stood, trembling, tears streaming down his face. He hadn't expected that, he just wanted to be heard once. When his music teacher, Mrs. Callahan, came up to him, she hugged him tightly. "Eli," she whispered, "that was the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years of teaching. Don't ever hide your gift again." Word spread fast. By morning, clips of his performance were all over social media. The video, titled, "They Laughed at Him Until He Started to Sing," went viral. Millions of people watched the boy who turned ridicule into redemption. Comments flooded in from strangers across the world. "I felt this in my soul. He reminded me to keep going." You can hear the love in his voice. But fame wasn't what changed Eli. What truly mattered was the day Jake Miller, the school's star athlete, and one of Eli's biggest bullies, approached him at lunch. Everyone went silent, expecting another cruel joke. Instead, Jake sat down beside him. "Hey, man," he said quietly, "I watched your video like 5 times. My dad passed last year too. Your song, it kinda helped me. He held out his hand. I'm sorry for how I treated you. Eli didn't know what to say. For a moment, he just nodded, then shook Jake's hand. That small gesture, that act of compassion and humility, felt like a door opening to something new. Wordlessly, forgiveness replaced bitterness, and friendship began where mockery once stood. Weeks turned into months. Eli started writing more songs, not for fame, but for healing. He began performing at community centers, hospitals, and nursing homes, places where people needed hope. He sang for veterans who couldn't forget their past, for children in shelters who didn't have parents to sing to them. He sought tears, smiles, and quiet gratitude. And every time someone thanked him, he remembered how it all started, with laughter, cruelty, and courage. One evening, Eli got an email from a record label in Nashville. They wanted to meet him, not because of his viral fame, but because they believed in his heart. They saw something real, a storyteller who could touch souls. When he told his mom, she cried. Your dad would be proud, she said. Eli smiled softly. I think he already knows. The day of the meeting, Eli stood in front of a glass building that shimmered under the Tennessee sun. He took a deep breath, guitar case in hand. Before walking in, he whispered a quiet prayer. This time, let me sing for them, but also for every kid who's ever been laughed at. He smiled, remembering his own trembling voice on that high school stage. He knew now that the pain had never been a punishment, it had been preparation. Inside the studio, he sang the same song that once silenced his classmates. The producer, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, listened without interrupting. When the final note faded, the man simply said, that wasn't a performance. That was truth. Let's make sure the world hears it. Months later, Eli's first single, Find My Sound, debuted on streaming platforms. Within weeks, it hit charts across the country. But for Eli, success wasn't about the numbers, it was about letters from people who said his song helped them through grief, loneliness, and loss. He kept every message, printed on paper, in a wooden box labeled, Dad's Promise. Years passed, and Eli never forgot Maplewood High. One spring, he returned, not as the awkward boy they once mocked, but as a guest performer for the new talent night. The same auditorium, the same red curtain. When he walked out, students whispered again, but this time with admiration. He smiled and said into the mic, I used to stand on this very stage shaking with fear. Some of you laughed that night. But you also listened, and that made all the difference. He sang his old song once more, not with sadness, but with gratitude. By the end, the crowd stood in thunderous applause. Among them was Jake, now a teacher himself, wiping away tears. When Eli finished, he looked out at the students and said, never let laughter stop you from shining. Because sometimes, people laugh only because they can't see the light you carry yet. That night, as Eli walked outside under the stars, a gentle breeze brushed his face. Somewhere deep within, he felt his father's presence, warm, proud, silent. The same way he used to stand behind him in the garage, humming softly. Eli smiled, whispering, I found it, Dad. I found my sound. And just like that, a boy who once hid behind silence became the voice of hope for thousands. Because sometimes, all it takes to change the world, is the courage to sing, even when they laugh.